Hello everyone and welcome to the Net Zero Week brought to you by YPO and iNetwork. I'm Gavin Rimington, Head of Public Sector at YPO, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar around procurement policy and the social value imperative. This session will cover a range of factors relating to procurement policy and a social value imperative, including national policy direction, some of the work the LGA National Advisory Group has undertaken, and help address the question, why is social value more important than ever to deliver social, economic and environmental outcomes? I'm delighted to be joined by our speaker today, Darren Nowd, Head of Procurement, Sales and Business Services at Durham County Council. I'm very fortunate to be joined by Darren, who's not only been involved in many of the recent national policy decisions on social value, but is always keen to share his views and expertise for the benefit of all in public service delivery. Just a couple of housekeeping items to mention before we start. As you can see, there's a chat box on the side of your screen where you can submit any questions you might have for the panel, which we'll try to answer at the end of the session. Depending on how many questions there are, we might not have time to answer them all, but we'll follow them up on email after the Net Zero Week. You can also use the menu icon on the top left of your screen to navigate back to the event agenda, where you can see all up and coming webinars. If you want to register for any more webinars, please follow the link at the bottom of your screen. Now, without further ado, I'll pass over to Darren.
Thanks, Gavin, and hello everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here for the YPO Net Zero Week. It's always a pleasure to get together with like-minded colleagues and share views. So I'm going to put maybe 5 slides up, just a bit of a review about the procurement policy direction and the social value imperative and why it's really important. Just before I go into the detail, coming from Durham, I thought it'd be appropriate to at least share a little bit of background of where we come from. So, as Gavin said, he's introduced my role at Durham, but also colleagues will probably know I'm the lead officer for the LGA at the LGA National Advisory Group, and I also chair the National Social Value Task Force for the LGA. You can see there are a few facts and figures about Durham. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to read them all out, but you can see we are a particularly large council with a reasonable procurement spend of around about £580 million. We were the first ever council to win a Cabinet Office Award on social value leadership that we're particularly proud of, and you can see some of the spend figures there in terms of the impact with SMEs and local spend and third sector. And I've added a couple of photographs there which hopefully will entice you to come and visit the beautiful city in due course. So nationally, what's been going on? So through the LGA, myself plus Tina Holland and a colleague Peter Schofield, also from the National Advisory Group, we've been working with Cabinet Office and MHCLG over several months now to develop some of the policy statements. But before I touch upon the latest one, which I think is going to be of big interest to people, and maybe a bit of a backtrack as to where we come from. So obviously, initially we had the Public Service Social Value Act, and then following on from that, we developed through the LGA, we set up the National Social Value Task Force and developed the tool to measure, report, record social value outcomes, the so-called themes outcomes measures, national TOMs or NTOMs, as they seem to be getting called these days. And then following on from that, there was a relaunch of the LGA National Procurement Strategy in England. And if you've been through that, you'll see there's a lot of coverage about the opportunities as well as commercialism for social value. And things have gone on from strength to strength there. And I think those of you who attended the online conference in February, will see that the 2021 national TOMs were introduced, and basically a development of the 2020 TOMs, but with a stronger environmental impact, which I think is very topical in light of the conference this week. Central government obviously have made a lot of progress when they launched PPN 0620 in September of last year, and from January they would take account of social value at a minimum of 10% on their projects, and that there is a framework to use to apply social value outcomes in procurement. And the very recent news is the procurement policy note on the National Procurement Policy Statement, which I'll touch upon some of the details. This has been a long time in coming. It was, I think, initially due late last year before even the Green Paper came out, but ultimately the Green Paper came first, and it did refer to some aspects of the National Procurement Policy Statement. But that's now been released. I'll touch upon some of the content of it. As you can see, it's a busy slide, but I thought I'd try and capture everything on one page. So really, this will, when the procurement bill comes in due course, this will place a legislative requirement for public authorities or contracting authorities to consider certain national priority outcomes alongside, of course, their own local ones. And you can see there in green, the creating new business, new jobs, new skills, tackling climate change, reducing waste, and improving supplier diversity, innovation, and resilience. So all public bodies will need to have regard for that in their procurement, which I think is a positive development and reinforces furthermore the importance of social value. There's a second strand talking about commercial and procurement delivery, and that's really to make sure that public bodies have got the right policies and processes in place to manage the key stages of commercial delivery as relevant to their procurement portfolio. And you can see some of the sub-elements there that are referred to in the policy statement, and there's things like publication of procurement pipelines, key performance indicators, should cost modelling, etc., which I think augurs well for people. And then there's an interesting addition at the end regarding skills and capability for procurement. So again, this will place an obligation on us to ensure that we've got the right capacity and capability to deliver value for money. And it's specifically referring to considering the procurement and contract management capability, but also benchmarking ourselves annually against relevant commercial procurement operating standards. So dependent on your own sector and where you're working, you'll need to measure yourselves accordingly and try to continually improve against similar type organisations. But I think if you look at the top right there in red, couple of statements that I've withdrawn from the NPPS, and it's saying really we're talking about core standards of procurement capability and delivery, as well as additional social value outcomes. And then it goes on to say contracting authorities should consider social value outcomes alongside the local priorities. So a clear steer from central government and Cabinet Office about the increasing importance of social value, which again I think augurs well for those of us who've been working in this area for some time. In terms of what does that mean locally and practically, what are the implications? These are just a couple of examples. We've updated our procurement strategy in Durham to take account of a lot of these issues. Obviously, the NPPS wasn't out at the time when we updated it, but we knew what was coming from the Green Paper. Very relevant to the work this week and the conference this week. We've, as many councils have declared a climate change emergency and have a response plan. From a social value point of view, on a regional basis, working with our local Northeast shared service, on any collaborative procurement, we have a minimum of 10% and maximum of 20% weighting on all collaborative projects. Just locally in Durham, we've set a minimum social value weighting of 10%. We haven't put a ceiling on that. It will vary project by project. And we'll also use the national TOMS, and we've adopted that within our award criteria for all procurement processes over the finder tender service values that were previously known as ODU thresholds. You can also see practically what that means, particularly from an environmental point of view. So in the procurement strategy, we've set ourselves tasks really of considering the carbon implications at the specification, development stage as a key driver, and including specific criteria to enable carbon reduction and climate change to be considered as part of the contract award processes. And we're working very closely with the key departments in the council, including sustainability and climate change teams, to develop our approach to net zero. Something I think will probably come out a little bit in the Q&A, something that's very topical, is the development. We've launched an initiative called the County Durham Pound, which is really all about social value and a reflection really of the last 12 months and particularly the COVID period. And, you know, we as procurers, we collaborate a lot, and I reflected that, you know, from a Durham perspective, I'd collaborated a lot regionally, I'd collaborated a lot nationally, but probably somewhat interestingly, less so locally. So we've got together with about a dozen organisations. Most of them are public sector organisations at this point in time, where we're going to work together to try and develop a common social value approach across the county. And that's involving people such as health, police, housing associations, Passport Office, Northumbria Water, the church. So you know, there's a big cocktail of people around the table to develop our approach, and that's really about taking a place-based social value approach to maximise the value of every pound that all of the key procurers or budget holders spend in Durham. So that's the end of the slides, but I think that puts into perspective quite nicely, hopefully, the importance of social value and the ever-increasing importance of social value, and where the opportunities are for us moving forward.
Thanks for that, Darren. I think it's a really timely and insightful presentation, especially what's going on nationally, but also some really great local insight. If it's okay, I'd just like to maybe ask a couple of questions. I suppose quite topical is social value isn't a new concept, as you outlined, but how do you think that, you know, the last 12, 14 months with the pandemic has impacted on it?
Good question. And it's been tough, I think, for all of us. I think if I reflect, maybe a couple of things. One is, I would say I think we need to reflect on the financial and economic position, because I think that has had a big bearing on things, and then maybe some of the lessons, if you want, that we've learned, I think, from an LGA national point of view, but also locally, working together. There's been a massive financial impact, quite clearly, on national government and local government, and, you know, PBOs such as yourselves, and just reflecting on the deficit figure. And I think when I put a few notes together quite recently for a presentation, I think it was about £355 billion UK budget deficit, which is, you know, around about 17%. So that's had a big impact, and my intuition tells me that despite a lot of the levelling up good news and money that seems to be becoming available, that there are going to be tough times ahead. So I think never more a priority to maximise the value of every pound that we spend in our communities, to optimise things. Unemployment's still quite high. It's still about a percentage higher than it was this time the year before. I'm told job vacancies are about 27% lower than the same time in 2020. So there's a lot of economic and financial impacts that needs really some kind of countermeasure putting in place to try and improve things. I think some of the lessons that we've learned is, despite the challenges, the communities have been very resilient and worked together, really well. But we've seen a big impact on people's mental health. I think the pandemic has highlighted some very obvious inequalities that need addressing, and again, hopefully, social value will be able to assist us in that regard. I mean, young people women, disabled people seem to be disproportionately impacted, and therefore, sustainable economic improvement is going to be a priority. I did feel, and this has probably been a little bit in the front line, that all of the good work that we were doing on social value in some cases got paused a little bit because we were in a very reactive environment, trying to source PPE and various other things that we never ever thought we'd need to buy, but did. And we had to work together with, central government, local government, the PBOs, and, I know YPO played a tremendous part in all of that. But I think keeping supply going and keeping the community going was a priority. And I felt, for a good 3-4 months, I wasn't doing anything really significant from a social value point of view. Whereas I think towards the end of the year and now coming into this year, I feel that we're very much back in the saddle. We're starting to be able to develop good social value outcomes. And it's more of a proactive situation again, rather than a reactive thing. And I think probably the biggest lesson for me has been obviously the inequality, clearly, but the importance of social value and collaboration across public, private sector and faith sectors as well has never been more important to maximise the value of every pound we spend. And again, if we go back to where I started on the question about the financial and economic situation, we really are going to need to step on the gas and do some good stuff, because I do think that at some point in time, there will be an austerity impact. There has to be, given the amount of deficit that we've got in public spending.
Yeah, thanks for that, Darren. I think there's myself and a few other people on the call will remember those dark days of China source PPE. A lot of organisations talk around sort of social value maturity, and just picking into your sort of lead nationally. How do you think local authorities, where do you think they are in terms of maturity as a sector?
I think, if I'm honest, it varies, as would a procurement capability. So people are at different stages. I think, if I may be so bold, I think local government is well ahead of the pack compared to other sectors, particularly, maybe health and also central government. So I think local government's well ahead of the pack, but I think that's been out of necessity. So, a lot of people say, well, why are you so passionate about this agenda? Why do you put so much time and effort in? I can't really afford not to, because of, the austerity that we face, the reduction in spending budgets. Maximising the value of every pound we have in County Durham has been critical for me. So I've had to do social value out of necessity. And I think that's why local government is so well advanced. But again, we need to reflect that there's different types of organisations in local authorities. There's some smaller district councils and some medium-sized organisations and some larger organisations, maybe such as ourselves in Durham. So I think resource is quite critical. And I think everybody's on their own journey. You can measure yourselves against, even the Social Value Maturity Index that was developed through the LGA, through the Task Force's one tool. And I think everybody thinks they need to be at the top of the pack. Well, everybody's on a journey, and what's right in Durham might not be right in another council. And, the aspirations in Durham may be different to a different organisation. So I think for me, it varies. People are on their own journey. They should go their own way and do what's right for your own organisation. You don't have to be the best at everything all the time. And, quite often, people look to the likes of myself and other colleagues who maybe have been on this journey for a while and think that we're streets ahead. And I always think there's still loads to do. We're still learning. Every project is a new opportunity, and you never stop learning on this journey. And I still think I'm quite immature, if you want, from a social value point of view, even though a lot of people might see Durham as a leader. So I think in summary, it does vary. I think the important thing is is about sharing the learning. So, yourself and others will have participated in the National Social Value Task Force Conference in February, where I think in the end we had 2,443 attendees, which was astonishing, online over a couple of days, given that normally in a physical presence we only had about 300, and there were some amazing presenters and people with different views and knowledge. And so I think wherever you are in maturity, there's people to talk to. People will always help and give you time and share their knowledge. And I was particularly pleased to see the Welsh LGA. They had their own conference late last year, and they're progressing things well. So I think it doesn't really matter where you are. It just to keep doing it, learn from each other, and let's try and progress as best we can. And what's right in Durham might not be right elsewhere. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, very, very comprehensive, Darren. And I suppose just sort of moving on to the next point, it's quite clear in Durham that the senior leadership are behind social value, and it's given a lot of weighting, a lot of leadership. But if maybe I can ask a question on behalf of maybe someone who's sat in not necessarily a local authority, but an organisation where it's not at the top table, any sort of cheats or hints and tips? And I know you sort of touched upon them, but anything you could sort of throw out to anybody?
To be honest, Gavin, I don't think there's any right answer on this, but I'll share my thoughts, because I'm quite often asked, should it be top-down enforced? Should it be policy-driven by corporate management team? Or should it be bottom-up, get on with it in the procurement function and try and drive it through? I think it's great if you can get top management commitment and top political commitment to do things. But ironically, in Durham, we initially went the other way, where I went to corporate management team and said, look, I think we should do this, this, and this. And they said, well, you don't need a mandate. This is just common sense. You need to maximise social, economic, and environmental outcomes. That's what councils do. Just get on with it. So that, I guess it gave me a mandate, but I had to work hard in the early days with colleagues in services that didn't quite understand the agenda and why it's important. And, I remember a very early conversation with a colleague in an ICT function who he used very colourful language, which I wouldn't dare use on this call. He says, but Darren, I just want a server. I don't want any of this other frills and fancy stuff. Just get me a server for the IT centre. So you have to work hard. And what I found, and I think others this will resonate, once you get a success and somebody sees the benefits of the outcomes, people think, oh, that was good and that's really beneficial, and I've added value and I've done more than just buy stuff. I'm helping the council or the organisation achieve my strategic objectives. And it's very infectious. And that's what I've found is, once it takes a while for the penny to drop, but once it drops, it drops. And, once they get it and they want more. And I think that's been really, really helpful. I think another real positive is, as you rightly say, our current chief executive, previous chief executive are both very passionate about this. I think I got lucky with the first chief executive, because before he became the chief executive, he was in charge of neighbourhood services, and he had a lot of challenges, and procurement helped him out a lot. So he had a lot of respect for procurement because we solved a lot of his problems. So we didn't have to convince him how important it was to the business, and he just allowed us to, proceed and deliver the social value outcomes. He was incredibly supportive of, and the new chief exec, the interim John Hewitt's equally as supportive, as our members. But I think an important thing is the relationship with economic development. So we've been lucky. We've got a new corporate director for regeneration and economic growth, a lady called Amy Harhoff, who's incredibly passionate about the social value stuff. So working together with procurement and regen and business support has given us a much wider impact across the business. And also in her area is planning. Now, social value always starts off as a procurement thing, inevitably. but actually it's everybody's thing. And if you can get social value into planning agreements and development projects that you may not even be procuring yourself, other people may be, managing the projects on your behalf. You've got another real opportunity area there. So I've gone around the houses with your question, but I think the issue for me is procurement needs to lead by example. Whether you've got top level support or not, sooner or later, with some successes, you'll get the momentum. It's very infectious. If you can get corporate leadership at the top table, fantastic. But I think you probably need a bit of both, top down, bottom up, to make it work. And I've seen other people who've gone top down and it's worked incredibly well. Other organisations have gone bottom up and it's worked incredibly well. It really depends how your organisation responds to change and opportunity. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, no, thanks for that, Darren. I could probably see you doing a bit of a revolution up there in terms of taking it forward back in the day. Just sort of as a side, it is touched upon around capability in procurement and commercial teams and capacity as well. How about from supplier side in terms of having to sort of demonstrate their social value, credentials? How do you feel that's been? How's that developing?
Yeah, it was a slow burn initially, and I speak my mind, as you know, so I'm going to be a bit controversial. I think some procurement officers early doors were lazy, and were just putting social value wording in and odd comments, and the supply base didn't understand the language. And I think obviously a key issue right at the very start, back in 2013, is we couldn't explain what social value was. We couldn't explain simply what we needed. And because we couldn't do that, we couldn't measure it. Because we couldn't measure it, we couldn't have it in the award criteria. So I think the themes and the outcomes and measures that we developed through the LGA National Social Value Task Force, and as ever, other models are available, as they say on the radio and TV. But having that objectivity and that quantification has simplified things to the supply base to make it really clear what we mean. And, we found with a lot of supplier engagement sessions, you'd say, well, tell me about your social value activities. And they didn't understand the question. And then you say, well, have you employed any young people? Have you made any engagement with the community? Have you spent any money locally? Have you created, any job opportunities? Oh, we do loads of that. So a lot of it early doors was language and understanding. So I think we've come a long way. And I think also, which has been really encouraging, particularly the major suppliers to local government and central government, they've really grasped social value. So we're starting to see it now going down the supply chain, and the suppliers also are pushing social value, either using the TOMS model or other models, going their own way, which is really good. But I think for me, the big learning point on the horizon is maybe not so much the social value thing, it's the procurement bidding thing. So if you think about it, we've spent many years training and educating the supply base about open procedure and restricted procedure and competitive dialogue procedure. And, very positively, the green paper that will end up in the procurement bill is going to change the English public contract regulations for the better, in my opinion. But what that does mean is we're going to have to go through the whole education supplier engagement process again, because you'll be training and educating ourselves to do and procure in different ways and better ways, thankfully. But unless we can get the market engaged early enough and do that similar level training education, it could be quite tricky. So for me, you can never do enough early market pre-procurement engagement, and I think that's going to be quite crucial, particularly maybe next year onwards, when maybe the bill's gone through and things are starting to be getting embedded.
Great. Yeah, and I think you're right there. The pre-engagement is vital. Obviously, I could probably talk and ask numerous questions, but probably just one to finish on. Obviously, you've shared a lot of content, a lot of knowledge, your expertise and passion on this topic. I think there's a lot in this for local authority colleagues, but also across the different public sector areas. But if you were to sort of give one tip, one takeaway from listening, what do you think that would be?
I think I would maybe ask one question and make two statements. As ever, you're never going to get a short answer with me, mate. So I think the question is how, and this very much came out of the conference, the national conference in February, and listened to some incredible speakers, and everybody was really saying, how can we develop a socially just economy that tackles inequalities that have been highlighted during a pandemic, and 2020 in particular. So how do we do that? And I think social value via procurement has got to be the answer. I think we've got a real opportunity to make a difference and show the real power of effective strategic procurement and social value delivery. I think the area I touched on with the County Durham pound, I think this is just my view, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But I think place-based social value is going to be the next big thing. So I think one of the learning points out of the pandemic is the importance of locality, of place, of working together within the community. So if you've got large organisations in a place, how can you work together collaboratively to deliver social value outcomes? That doesn't necessarily mean collaborative procurement and collaborative contracting, but can you work in a similar way to create social value opportunities in your locality? I think that's going to be a big topic and a big opportunity area the next year or two. And I think the biggest message, the biggest takeaway that I've learned in the last couple of years is it's not just a procurement thing anymore. It's everybody's thing. If you can get social value into development agreements, if you can get social value into planning projects and get commitments through that, you've got a real big opportunity. And again, I think once you've had a few successes, you build momentum, the enthusiasm is infectious, and it becomes everybody's job. And it's not an add-on, it's part and fundamentally part of what we do. And if you look at the objectives of a council, ultimately it's to improve the social, economic and environmental well-being of your place. That's social value. So I think that for me are the, one question and two statements, maybe two long ones.
No, thanks for that, Darren. As always, plenty of value in that. So thank you very much for your time and your expertise, Darren.
Most welcome, anytime.
Great.
I just wish you well with the rest of the conference this week, and we've got the Q&A later, which I'm looking forward to. But I'm sure it'll be a really good event. And again, thanks to YPO for putting this on and bringing us all together. As ever, you're a very proactive organisation and a pleasure to deal with. So always happy to support as best I can.
Great. Thanks for that, Darren. Checks in the post. Yes. Okay, so I think we're now moving on to questions and answers from attendees. So I think we've got one in the chat. So we've got some questions in the chat. I think the first one is, how can we make sure that social value doesn't get deprioritized again if and when we face future challenges? What have we learned to make sure that it remains a fundamental, not a choice? Darren, I think you're probably better qualified than myself to have an attempt at that.
That's fine. I guess it goes back to the policy slide that I put up in terms of, I think if we reflect on the last probably 12 months or so, central government policy has obviously changed with the PPN to introduce social value in all central government procurement. We had the green paper that will lead to new legislation later this year. I think it will go through Parliament. There's no fixed date, but probably Q4 of this calendar year, we probably will see the procurement bill. We've just seen the National Procurement Policy Statement. So I think from a government message point of view, the message is quite clear. And again, a little bit about when you were talking about the getting it embedded and how to get the organisation on board with it. I think people are starting to gain experience. They're starting to see the benefit of social value. It isn't just nice words anymore. It's starting to be measured, recorded, it's tangible, people will see the benefits. And I just think it will become an inherent part of business. And I think from a public sector point of view, we've been doing this for a couple of years and things have gone well. I think the private sector is now really driving hard too on this stuff. And I think also, if I reflect on consumer choice, even in terms of the purchasing decisions that people are making in their, in their own home life, I think particularly younger people, I find their moral and social value compass is much stronger than mine was when I was a youngster. And so I think consumer choice will drive social value outcomes in everyday life. So as ever, I've got my rose-tinted contact lenses in, so you never know what happens in reality. But I can't see us going back. I think people are starting to appreciate the importance of value. I think people are starting to see the importance of place and locality, and doing good. And for me, doing good is good business, whether you're in the public sector, or private sector, third sector, or faith sector. So I can't see it returning back anytime soon. And if we do face further austerity in due course, I think that just amplifies the reason furthermore. Even those who maybe are not on board or don't fully believe or don't fully subscribe, it'll be a necessity anyway. So I don't think this thing's going to go away anytime soon. Is my view, and that's why I put a lot of time and effort into it, and I'm so passionate about it. So, but we'll see.
Great, thanks for that, Darren. Thanks for everyone for putting the questions in the chat. As you said, we'll try and get through as many as possible. I think there's a really interesting question here. It says, have you provided training to procurement and commissioning officers to be able to address climate implications in spec development and contract award? Or do you have sustainability climate officers providing support? I suspect that's just in relation to the role at Durham.
Yeah, from a local point of view at Durham, we are blessed to have some incredibly clever technical colleagues in the likes of energy management and climate change. Even only this morning in Durham, we had a cross-functional meeting on what we call our net zero carbon board. So we are blessed with good knowledge and good resource. But at the end of the day, you have to get this stuff into your projects. And the earlier that you have the conversation in a project, the better, from my experience. And we did initially we trained procurement people on initially social value and the use of the TOMs, which we led as a procurement function ourselves with our own staff, and then wider staff, including commissioners and service managers, because you'll probably find that I'll call them techies. I hope that doesn't sound too disrespectful, but the techies understand the technical aspect, but they don't actually understand the commissioning or the design process, and then the procurement process. So you need to explain the whole cycle to get them involved. And we've trained our not everybody, but the key technical people who can have an influence. And what we now do is just have a look at the procurement pipeline, look at opportunities, and every project has its own opportunities, and particularly those that lend themselves particularly for climate change, which is obviously topical this week with your conference. We sit down with those people and discuss the opportunities, and even involve them in the soft market testing, early market engagement, to influence the suppliers' knowledge and consideration, but more importantly, to find out from them what is the art of the possible. Because we like most people these days follow a category management approach, but reality of life is, and resources being as they are, procurement officers can't be the technical expert in every single category all of the time. So you need that technical support. So I would encourage training of the wider technical departments. And again, as well as making sure your procurement projects run well, that also ensures other people are doing social value things as part of their daily job. And we've had some sessions with planning colleagues. Now, some of the projects that our planners get involved in, I never see, I never touch, none of my staff do. but they have a massive impact in the locality where, say, a company's coming to do a development, and as part of their planning submission, if we can get the planners to understand the social value benefits beyond what are called Section 106 agreements, which tends to just be like money, we've got an opportunity to have a wider impact. So it will be too bold of me to say it's mainstream, but it is embedded and getting better. And the more you do, the more you learn. And quite often on projects, the practical involvement on the project itself can provide training. You don't necessarily have to put a training session on for some people. They may have one project a year where they're involved from a procurement point of view. So by working with them on the project, you can influence, the way things are done. So there's, many ways to skin a cat, as they say.
Great, thanks for that, Darren. The questions are coming in thick and fast. So I think the next one has complemented on the, it's an interesting topic, but to see how local values are taking social values forward with procurement. Are there examples that include central government that is capturing local authority geographical areas? So I think that's about almost like a place-based approach that includes probably things like voluntary and other sectors, but also where central government's active. Have you come across any examples in your work, Darren?
I think, the type of people I engage with, obviously, I engage with Cabinet Office, MHC, LGA, and various other departments in my National League job from a policy point of view. But from a practical point of view, I engage with Crown Commercial Services, obviously yourselves, YPO, NEPO, ESPO, and so on, from the PBO. So whether it's central government, Crown Commercial Services, or whether it's a large public buying organisation, all of those people are now developing or including social value in their framework agreements. Now, being honest, it's tricky to do it at the framework level, because at the framework level, obviously, it's not a contract, it's a framework agreement. There could be loads of business through that framework agreement. There could be very little business. What we need as procurers is the ability, when we're calling off from those frameworks, to have the framework in place to call off social value and include it in the call off process. And more that's now happening. Obviously, from a central government point of view, from January this year, they included a minimum of 10% in all of their major procurements. So as time goes by, we should see more and more social value opportunity included in central government frameworks. And frankly, if, particularly Crown Commercial Services, and I've said this to them, so this may sound a bit controversial, but it's nothing I haven't said to their faces. If they don't include social value in their framework agreements, they're not going to get used, because particularly in local government, we need social value in there. We need it embedded. We need to be able to extract social value in the call-off phase. So I think more and more it is happening, and it will happen. And again, I think the PBOs such as YPO, NEPO, ESPO, they caught onto this quite some time ago, and it was done voluntary. It wasn't like a government mandate or whatever. I think that just from a customer relationship point of view, and the relationship that that the PBOs have, particularly with local government and the wider public sector, you understood quite early on that this was an important requirement. So so did it, and I'm hopeful that central government it'll evolve too, and that will hopefully create geographical opportunities as well. So rather than it just being a framework where big nationals can get involved, if there could be technical lots or regional lots, etc., that can help people.
Right, thanks for that, Darren. I think there's a question that does get thrown up quite a bit. So, how would you address any concerns that introducing social value tendering will add to suppliers' cost base and so drive up prices? We are trying to highlight that often suppliers already deliver similar social value for their other customers, but basically any advice is welcome. So I'm not sure if you got all of that, Darren, but I think it's one around the suppliers and the cost.
There is no evidence that I've seen locally in Durham, or from other colleagues, or from the task force, that says social value costs more money. Now, that is, I think, due to the framework of public procurement that says things have to be relative, linked to the subject matter, and proportionate. Now, clearly, if I was going to buy PPE from you as a PBO, and I said, oh, by the way, I want you to give every kid in County Durham a free helicopter ride as part of the contract, then clearly I'm adding costs, but that's not relevant, it's not proportionate, it's not linked to the subject matter. So I think this is where the early market engagement is important, because organisations will have social value aspirations, supplying markets will have social value opportunities that they're prepared to commit to, and it's a cost of them doing business generically, whether they're providing goods or works or services to a council or somebody in the street. So you have to make sure that the ask is not disproportionate and also sees a benefit. And one example, which is an old chestnut of mine that I always chuck in, back from probably 2016, where we needed to buy banking services. The Co-op Bank walked away from us, and we needed to get new banking arrangements in place. It became quite apparent from the pre-market engagement we had with about 6 banks. They were all going to do education of young people, money matters in school. So when we said, well, we want you to commit to deliver training and education at primary school level of young children, it wasn't an added cost, because it was going to happen anyway. It might not have happened in Durham, but it was going to happen anyway. Likewise, whilst that's a benefit for Durham, because young people are getting educated on money management matters, which will help them later in life, the banks aren't silly. Those people, young little Darren, one day will become somebody who's looking to get a job and get a bank, and they remember the nice lady or the nice man who turned up and gave him a pink money box and taught him all about money matters. So it's got to be relevant and proportionate. I have another suggestion, and this is this is not too scientific, but it's my gut feel. I always say, excuse me, if you're doing weighting in social value, less than 10% kind of tells the market you're doing it, but it's not really important and it doesn't really matter that much. More than 20%, you might be signalling to the market, we may be prepared to pay for this. And that is pure commercial hunch. There's no science, there's no evidence. It's just my view of the world, having played this game, for the last few years, and I'm hearing, certain people talking about 30% and 40%. That starts to signal to the market social value is more important than the product or the works or the service itself. Now, that might be right in some cases, category by category. It's not something that personally, from my experience, I would advocate. So I always think between 10 and 20%, that feels right so far. And, in due course, there'll be more evidence and we'll be able to judge more scientifically. But at the end of the day, it's got to be relevant. It's got to be proportionate. It's got to be linked to the subject matter. You need to have had good dialogue with the market before you go to the market. So you're not asking for something that is unrealistic, unobtainable, or going to cost you a lot of money. And that's, if you get a surprise, if you're paying higher prices, that's because you didn't understand the market and didn't engage properly. So as long as you do good market testing beforehand, you should not be in a situation where it costs you more money, or at least the market will say, we can deliver that, but you do realise you're going to be paying a premium for it. And then you have a choice. So I think it's just common sense, good practical procurement.
Good. I think someone's just put in the question sort of linked to that. How do you decide what the weighting of social should be? And I know you covered it a little bit. For example, 10% seems a very arbitrary figure. We need to be able to better measure the actual added value of social value. But with few purchasing professionals, will have the resources to do this throughout the life of the contract. So it's I think it's just on the back of what you were saying, Darren. So I don't know if you can sort of add any ideas to that.
It's really it's really challenging, but at the end of the day, it's no different than asking the question we've asked ourselves for years: what's the price quality weighting? How much for price? How much for quality? And now we've got a third leg, like how much for social value. say the decision making or the award criteria needs to meet the needs of the project, which needs to meet the objectives of the organisation. So it really depends on what's driving your organisation, which could be a corporate thing or it could be a specific locational thing. So let's imagine we've got I don't know, let's say we're building a primary school in a very deprived area. We may think, well, actually, we're going to go big here on social value. We're going to go big on jobs within social value because we want to create some jobs in that locality, or the third sector might have some particular requirements. Or so at the end of the day, it's down to your corporate objectives, but it's also about understanding need. And this is probably one of the biggest lessons I've learned the last year or two, where even though we've been good at social value and delivered loads of great stuff, is it the right stuff for the right place at the right time, and is that stuff needed? So it's needs based, really. You need to understand what is the need. And if I take County Durham, County Durham has got some very affluent areas, it's got some deprived areas, it's got some rural areas, it's got some city areas, it's got some town areas. So this is where the intelligence comes in the pre-procurement phase about high level, what are the corporate objectives? Now, clearly we've declared a climate change emergency. So the environmental stuff's going to be important where it's possible, which it will be in a lot of cases, but not in all cases. Depending on where a project's being carried out, particularly if it's like a construction-based project, you can have a look and see what is the locality there, what does the community need. So this is, I'm taking a very holistic and a very wide view of procurement here, but that's what it should be if it's strategic procurement. If you're not thinking about these things, if you're not trying to identify what the needs are and try and build that into procurement, for me, it's not procurement, that's just purchasing. You're just purchasing stuff. And that's the difference. And again, I think more mature organizations, which kind of relates back to one of the early questions about the embedding and so on, more mature organizations will realize the importance of procurement. So in my world, if I think back to when I was in the car business, 70% of the price on the bonnet of a car was bought out bits. So procurement was king, and getting the right, systems and materials and whatever was important. And local jobs and supply chain impacts locally. Whilst I wanted an efficient supply chain, I wasn't too worried about apprenticeships or local spend or whatever. But procurement had a big impact on the decision making. If I look at the council, it's probably 50%. We're a £1.2 billion organisation. We spend about 600 million quid, and we are 600 million quid. So half of what we are is what we buy. So procurement's really important. And if we've got objectives to achieve, then using that procurement spend strategically is important. Now, I'm lucky our chief exec gets that, our members get that, our CMT get that. But we've worked hard over a long period of time to get there. If I go back to 2009, we were just purchasing stuff and nobody really knew who we were and what we were doing. So I think at the end of the day, your reward criteria needs to meet the needs of the project, which needs to meet the needs of the business. Dead easy to say, dead hard to do, by the way.
Great.
So I don't know.
Thanks for that, Darren. I'm sure, as with all of this, it's an emerging agenda and people, but it's sort of having some real life experience from yourself and your ideas. I think there's a really interesting question that's just popped up and it's in relation to the future of sort of place-based social value. Is there a question to say that creating platforms where communities say what they require so that this is visible to the suppliers of a public body so they can deliver what the communities actually need? That's quite an interesting one, Darren. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
That is a very interesting and a very topical question. So back to my point, somebody might say to me, Darren, you've delivered loads of social value, but you got social value for social value's sake. It might not be what the community wanted at the right time in the right place and so on. So how do I know what the community wants? Now, I'm lucky in Durham, we have things called area action partnerships. and we put a lot of money into them, which is where we've got like 14 groups across the county wide whose role in life is to work with the community, talk to the community, listen to the community, get all their ideas and bring it in. And that works to a degree. But one of the things that I'm thinking about at the minute is something more granular than that. So let's say go back to, I'm building a school in a deprived area. How can I find out what the community really, really needs simply? And I think technology's got a place there to help. And there are platforms there already, and some that are evolving. And very interestingly, only about 4 weeks ago, I was asked by somebody working for Scottish Government, how did I decide the community wish list? I said, what's a community wish list? And it's basically what this question's about. It's at a granular level, what does the community really need? So we need to find a way of getting that kind of information. And I've jokingly referred to it as social value Tinder, which is where you've got the community saying, I want that, and you've got somebody saying, I can supply that, and they match. And I don't know which way you swipe on Tinder because I'm married for years, but I'm told it works in real life. But there is a system in Suffolk, I think it's Suffolk, in Brighton and Hove. My colleague Keith Coleman, they have a system that kind of does this to a degree. So I think it's quite topical, but I think it's got legs, and I think this could be an opportunity area to better inform procurers, because at the end of the day, you can only do so much research based on the resources availability you have. If we've got some intelligent system telling us and informing us stuff, that can only be a good thing. So I think from an e or a digitalization point of view, that's got legs, and there's a couple of people dabble in this area, but I think it's an opportunity area for sure. And if anyone's got a good one, let me know.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's just a final question that's come in, and if you just take a minute or two, what climate change mitigation related social value asks have you found most, but also and least practical with suppliers? So I'm not sure do you want me to repeat that, Darren?
Yeah. No, it's so far. I'm going to be controversial again. I'll backtrack before I answer the question. When I came into local government from the private sector, the words that were being bandied around at the time were sustainable procurement, that I did a lot of research on. And that tended to be a lot about green environmental stuff and very little about social and economic stuff. And then as the crash, austerity, significantly reduced government funding, the social and the economic factors, they became the bride, not the bridesmaid, and the environmental aspects that had previously been the bride became the bridesmaid and became secondary. So I think environmental stuff for a period of time has had lesser of the agenda, lesser of the consideration. And if we look at and again, as ever, other brands are available, but if I talk about the TOMs, the themes, outcomes and measures, there are CO2 reducing emissions stuff in there. And that's what people have tended to look at, but it's easy stuff. It's easy to understand. It's quite easy to quantify. It's quite easy to deliver category or technology by technology. And if you look at the TOMS 21 release that have literally only probably 2 months old, you'll see there's a lot more environmental factors that have gone in, because everyone said, don't change the TOMS again. They're complicated enough. We're only just getting our heads around 2020 version. We did change them, but we changed them only in the environmental area. So I think time will tell what will be easier to achieve and what will be more difficult to achieve, because so far I think we've only tackled the easy stuff, the low hanging fruit, the easy to do stuff. if we're really going to make a dent into net zero, we need to go a lot further. But the other thing that we're working on a lot in Durham, and we had a meeting this morning, and interestingly, I, as the procurement head, I chair something called the Carbon Capital Program Group. So it's a cross-functional team: procurers, finance, energy people, sustainability people, net zero, clever techies. I chair the group, and we have bid for money within the council from our capital programme, and we do projects on an investor save basis. So as well, when we go, and some of those will be stuff that we do, some of that will be stuff that we buy. Now we'll put social value and put climate change objectives into the technological things that we buy, where it's relevant. But a lot of what we're doing in the climate change space is an investor save basis. You need to spend from a capital point of view to reduce the CO2, which hopefully then will have an ongoing revenue basis. I don't think I've answered that question the way the question was raised, but that's the reality of things. And I do think the environmental aspects are going to increase in priority. And we've seen Greater Manchester only recently saying, whereas in the past they were saying we're going to do 30% social value across the board, they're now saying we're doing 10% environmental as a minimum. So, it's starting to beef up. But I think for me, the jury's out. Time will tell, and we'll have to see. And I think this is where now the National Procurement Policy Statement and other policy instruments will be pushing people more. But I do think also, and this is not a controversial point as such, it's a fact of life, with government are talking about levelling up and addressing inequality. I do think there needs to be some substantial central government investment in environmental matters to get more people on board to invest to save.
Right. Well, thanks for that, Darren. I mean, we've run out of time, and I'd first like to thank all the virtual audience for joining us and being active. Obviously, we've already stated this recording will be made available, but probably biggest thanks to Darren for taking up the time to share his information and his knowledge, which hopefully people have found really interesting. And I think it's a case of watch this space. There's a lot more to be coming on this agenda. So thank you once again, Darren. Thank you to our virtual audience. And I'm sure we'll be hearing from Darren further in terms of what's happening nationally and locally within Durham. So thank you very much.